Day 19. The morning after heavy air strikes is never quiet in the way people imagine. It is quiet and in pieces. I woke to birds calling again, but not everywhere. Some sections of the jungle were silent, as if the sound itself had been burned out. Smoke still clung to the ridgeline, drifting down in thin gray fingers that smelled of fuel and scorched leaves. No enemy fire greeted the sunrise. That alone told me the strikes had hurt them, but hurt is not the same as defeated. We moved carefully, as if the ground itself might react badly to being stepped on. No one stood up fully. No one lingered in the open. Men spoke in low voices, conserving sound the way we conserved ammunition. By mid-morning, we saw movement again, not massed, not confident. Small enemy groups appeared on the slopes, cautious, spaced out, stopping often. Enemies' survivors repositioning, new enemies' crews probing for angles that still worked. I watched through binoculars as one enemy's group crawled to what used to be a gun pit and stopped, clearly confused by the crater where it had been. That was satisfying in a cold way. But they were still dangerous, though. Around noon, sporadic rifle fire cracked from the north, not aimed at us directly, more like covering movement. I didn't take the bait. We stayed quiet. Let them move, let them think. The afternoon passed in tension rather than violence. We rotated watches, redistributed water, checked on wounded who had stayed behind overnight because evacuation had been impossible. One man asked if he could smoke. I told him not yet. The smell carries farther than you think when the jungle has been burned bare. As the sun dropped, the enemy tried once more, a small push, carefully testing whether the sky's anger had truly passed. We answered with machine gun fire, brief, precise, enough to stop movement without inviting retaliation. They pulled back quickly. That was the pattern now. They would not charge blindly, and we would not chase recklessly. The siege had become a contest of nerves layered over firepower. That night, the jungle felt altered, open in places where trees no longer stood, ground carried in strange ways, echoing where it hadn't before. Lying awake, I realized something important. The enemy was still advancing, but now it was cautious advancement, shaped by fear of the sky. Day 19 ended with the line intact, the airstrip still functioning. The war had not slowed. It had changed tempo. Day 20. The day began with voices instead of gunfire, and that alone felt wrong. I heard them drifting uphill from the valley floor. Hmong women calling to each other, children crying, men shouting instructions that didn't quite make sense because panic had already reached their throats. The sound climbed toward us faster than any enemy patrol. Hmong civilians were moving, not all at once, not in an organized wave, but in pieces, Hmong families carrying what they could, some with bundles tied in cloth, some with nothing at all. Hmong who had lived near the airstrip long enough to know what accurate fire meant, and what it meant when it started landing closer each day. The enemy didn't need to shell them again. Fear was doing the work. By mid-morning, the first CIA Air America evacuation aircraft attempted to land. Mortar rounds bracketed the runway, not directly on it, but close enough to make every approach a gamble. One aircraft turned away at the last moment. Another came in hard, touched down fast, and didn't stop until it had to. I watched from my position as Hmong civilians ran toward it, clutching children, tripping over loose stones, some looking back over their shoulders as if afraid the valley itself might grab them. I sent 2 squads down to help control movement, to keep people from bunching up where shells could do the most damage. Every man I sent felt like tearing a stitch out of our defense, but leaving Hmong civilians to chaos would have done worse damage in the long run. The enemy watched. They always did. They didn't fire heavily while the evacuation was happening. Their restraint was calculated. They knew panic spreads better when you let it breathe. Around noon, enemy infantry edged closer again. Visible now in short glimpses through trees and smoke, they were testing whether our attention had been pulled too far downhill. I refused to let it happen. I stayed on the radio, voice steady even when my hands weren't. We shifted squads back and forth, covering gaps, keeping the illusion of strength intact. Illusion matters more than numbers. The afternoon stretched painfully long. CIA Air America aircraft came and went when they could. Sometimes they didn't come at all. Each delay meant more people waiting, more fear pooling in the valley. Late in the day, a mortar round landed closer than any before, close enough to throw dirt over a line of evacuees, but no direct hit, just enough to remind everyone that mercy was temporary. That night, the valley felt emptier, with fewer lights and fewer voices. The airstrip's still there, still functioning in bursts, but the sense of community, of home, had begun to peel away. I sat in my fighting hole, listened to the wind move through trees that now sheltered fewer people. Day 20 taught me something I had known in theory, but never wanted confirmed. When Hmong civilians start leaving, a battle stops being about ground. It becomes about time. How long you can hold before there is nothing left behind you worth holding for. Day 21. The airstrip didn't open this morning. Not officially, not safely. Mortar fire began before dawn. Not heavy, not random. Precise enough to close the runway without destroying it. Rounds landed close, walking back and forth like a man pacing while thinking. Whoever was spotting for them knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't an attempt to smash Long Tieng. It was an attempt to choke it. I could feel the effect immediately. Radios carried with more tension than information. American pilots circled longer before committing. Every decision took an extra minute, and in war minutes are blood. The enemy infantry stayed mostly hidden, letting gravity and steel do their work. They had learned patience from us, or perhaps we had learned it from them. By mid-morning, the runway opened briefly. One CIA Air America aircraft tried to land, but mortars fell again. The American pilot waved off and climbed out hard, engines screaming like something wounded. Supplies that didn't arrive meant rationing again, water, ammunition, medical dressings. I counted each category in my head like a ledger that never balanced. The valley below us looked thinner today, with fewer civilians, with more abandoned structures. Dogs wandered through the dust near the strip, confused by the absence of its people, and that image stayed with me longer than the explosions. Around noon, the enemy tested our perimeter again. Brief contact north, a few shots exchanged, then withdrawal. They weren't looking for victory today. They were confirming containment. I shifted squads inward again, tightening the defensive belt. Space was now a liability. Compact lines were easier to cover, easier to control. The afternoon was spent under intermittent shelling, not enough to force movement, just enough to keep us pinned, tense, and to stay alert. Men learn exhaustion not from running, but from never relaxing. As dusk approached, the mortars stopped, and that worried me more than if they'd continued. Silence like that means someone is either out of ammunition or planning something else. Every man was sharp, rifles ready, eyes scanning. No one spoke unless necessary. Night fell cold and clear. Stars came out in numbers that felt almost mocking. From the hills above us, I could hear digging again with shovels and picks. The enemy reinforcing their advantage while we waited below. I lay awake long after my eyes closed, listening to the rhythm of the siege. Fire, silence, movement, and restraint. Day 21 ended with Long Tieng still breathing, but now every breath felt measured. Day 22. Morning arrived in fragments. Cough here, a boot scraping rock there. Radios clicking alive and going silent again. The kind of morning where everyone is awake before they're told to be. The enemy's mortars returned before first light, but differently than yesterday. Fewer rounds, wider spacing. They weren't closing the airstrip. They were hurting us. Rounds landed just far enough inside our perimeter to force movement, the kind that reveals habits. I recognized it immediately. They were shaping the inner ring. I ordered the platoon to fall back another notch. Not far, just enough to keep our lines from being pinned against exposed ground. It hurt to give up more space, but the ground we abandoned was already compromised by observation, and holding it would have cost more than it bought. We compressed with men, shifted closer together, voices quieter, and eyes sharper. The valley felt smaller again, like the walls had moved inward while we slept. By mid-morning, enemy infantry appeared in fleeting glimpses on the slopes. not advancing, just present, a reminder. They knew exactly where we were now. The guessing phase was over. Around noon, a brief window opened on the airstrip, and one CIA Air America aircraft landed, unloading ammunition and medical supplies at a dead run. And once the wounded went in, the plane took off almost immediately, engines clawing the air as mortar rounds bracketed behind it. We cheered without sound, because supplies mean hope, even small amounts. The afternoon was marked by constant tension rather than violence. Enemy fire came in short bursts, always forcing us to react, to adjust, to stay just off balance. I walked the line repeatedly, correcting posture, reminding men to drink water, forcing myself to stay visible in front of the men. As dusk fell, the enemy fire faded again, not because they were done, because they had accomplished today's goal. We were tighter, lower, and more compressed than yesterday. That night, I could hear enemy voices clearly for the first time, not shouting, not whispering, just talking casually with confidence. They were close enough now to feel comfortable. I lay awake listening, staring into darkness inches from my face. Day 22 ended with a hard truth settling into me. We were no longer defending Long Tieng edges. We were defending its heart. Day 23. The sky woke angry. Before dawn, Hmong T-28 aircraft engines rolled over the valley in layers. Not a single pass, not a tease, but a steady presence that pressed down on the ears and chest. It felt like the ceiling had dropped closer. Men looked up without meaning to, as if reassurance might fall out of the clouds. We needed the sky today. The enemy made sure we knew it. Mortars began just after first light, tight and deliberate, landing inside the ring we'd drawn last night, with surgical taps that forced us to move, then punished the movement. Whoever was spotting us already knew our new shape, and that meant one thing: someone had eyes on us. I ordered smoke laid in short bursts, not to hide everything, just to blur certainty. The radio crackled constantly, requesting and adjustments of coordinates. The Hmong forward air controller's voice stayed calm, almost gentle, like a hand on the shoulder while everything else shook. By mid-morning, the air strikes began in earnest. They came in waves, rolling thunder that didn't stop long enough for the ears to rest. Bombs stitched the hills. Napalm crawled through gullies. The jungle answered with fire and smoke so thick it turned the sun into a dull coin. The enemy fire never fully stopped. It thinned, shifted, then thinned again, but it could no longer dominate. Every time an enemy's mortar spoke, a Hmong T-28 aircraft answered. Every time an enemy's recoilless rifle cracked, the sky seemed to lean closer. We lived in that narrow margin all day. Men shouted corrections over the noise. Runners crawled instead of running. Wounded were moved when they could be. Time broke into small pieces measured by radio calls and the space between impacts. At one point, a bomb fell close enough that the ground lifted us and set us down again. And for a moment, I thought my legs were gone. Then they answered when I told them to move. In the afternoon, the enemy tried to press us. A short push, we met it with machine guns and smoke, held long enough for the next wave of Hmong T-28 aircraft to arrive. The enemies pulled back again, not broken, not beaten, but contained. As dusk approached, the sky finally eased its grip. The last Hmong T-28 aircraft peeled away, leaving a ringing quiet behind them. Smoke drifted low and heavy, settling into the valley like fog that burned the lungs. We used the quiet to count heads, treat wounds, and redistribute ammunition. Faces were gray with dust and exhaustion. No one spoke much. Words felt like luxuries. That night, I lay awake listening to distant digging and closer breathing, with my own heart beating too loud in my ears. Day 23 ended without a breakthrough for either side, but it ended with something rare. For one full day, the enemy had not dictated the rhythm. We had borrowed the sky, and for now, it had agreed to stay. Day 24. The enemy reached us today, not in theory, not on a map, but in flesh and breath. The morning began deceptively calm. Smoke still clung low in the valley from yesterday's airstrikes. For a few hours, the enemy's mortars stayed silent. The recoilless rifles didn't speak. That silence felt intentional, like a man drawing breath before shouting. I ordered men to be on alert early. No one complained. Just after mid-morning, the first contact came from the north, close, too close. Not incoming fire, but the sharp crack of rifles at a distance you measure in heartbeats, not meters. They had slipped in during the smoke. I crawled forward to an observation point and saw them. Enemy infantry at the edge of our outer belt, moving low, using the ground with the confidence of men who believe they belong there. For the first time since this began, I could see enemies' faces without binoculars. That changes something inside me. I gave the order, and our line erupted. Machine guns tore into the tree line. Rifles answered in disciplined rhythm. Grenades arced and disappeared into smoke and brush, returning sound and violence in tight, brutal pulses. The noise was immediate and intimate. Not thunder from the sky, but men shouting, weapons cycling, bodies hitting earth. They pushed hard. This wasn't probing. This wasn't testing. This was an attempt to bite into the heart of Long Tieng and see if it would tear. For an hour, maybe two, time stopped making sense. We fought at close range. I moved constantly, shouting, dragging men back into cover, forcing others forward when gaps opened. Once, I fired my rifle until it clicked empty without realizing it. A runner shoved fresh magazines into my hands without a word. The enemy pressed to grenades distance in one sector. Air support came as fast as it could, but this fight was too close for comfort. Bombs landed beyond us, shaking the ground, reminding the enemy that pushing farther would be expensive. That reminder worked, and by early afternoon, the pressure eased, not because they had failed, but because they had learned something. They pulled back slowly, deliberately, covering each other, leaving behind spent casings, torn foliage, and the unmistakable signs of bodies dragged away. We did not chase. We couldn't afford to. When the firing stopped, the silence felt wrong, too sudden, too empty. My hands shook when I finally noticed them shaking. I walked the line, counted men, counted wounds, too many, but not enough to break us. The outer belt had been tested and bent, but it still held. As evening fell, the smell of cordite hung thick in the air with smoke drifted low again, settling into everything. Somewhere downhill, evacuation flights resumed briefly, taking more Hmong civilians away from a place that no longer belonged to the living. That night, no one slept deeply. We knew now, with certainty, the enemy was no longer surrounding Long Tieng. They were inside its reach. Day 24 ended with our line still intact, but with the knowledge that from this point forward, every day would be fought at arm's length.